but the game is trying to
Waves in the game are really interesting because it's a very tonal shift within the whole visual look of the game. It's kind of like this more organic, more surreal, dreamlike landscape compared to what you're used to before this point. It's we kind of used the visuals and this kind of unreal theme very subtly, but here it's kind of at the forefront, and it's, to me, has kind of been designed as this kind of journey through the inner self, through the body, and it's really designed to be a very different experience compared to the rest of the game.
This, for me, is probably the most pivotal music cue in the game, and it's the one that most people write to me about to say that they are absolutely obsessed with and they love. It's the only music cue that has singing. It has a female voice, and I think that's a really important shift for me, that you've gone from this beautiful string music, but it's quite abstract, into what is effectively a song. And with lyrics, so you're actually explicitly saying something as a composer at this point. The other thing that I think it's important to say for me is it's the biggest shift from the music that I wrote for the mod. It's the same music, but the act of having it sung by an amazing singer. I sang it on the original and it's really bad, and Clara Sanabras re-recorded it. And it's what good actors do, it's what Nigel Carrington did, it's what good musicians do, and they take something that you've created and they just shove it up into the next level and make something that's good into something really extraordinary. And also for me, I think it's a point where the environment art and the music just meld so beautifully and so seamlessly into one. I mean, on a personal level, I've played the game hundreds of times now, and I still enter the caves and I look at Rob's work and I'm just absolutely overawed, just gobsmacked by its beauty. And I just think it's a really magical moment in gaming for me, actually. I know that probably sounds really dramatic, but I just think it absolutely hits something where everything just works together. And the music is so dreamlike. You know, Rob has talked about the journey through the body, and I think that's absolutely, for me, the music becomes so organic and fluid, and actually very feminine and female at that point. You're hearing the voice of his love.
I just want to say, I think you can divide caves in games into pre and post Dear Esther. I think that it's just a way of breaking away from reality into saying what do you do with these spaces that actually makes them this incredibly, much more vividly colourful and much more kind of interpretative and look from it. And it's really interesting that I look at caves now in games and I find myself going, that's a very Rob Briscoe cave. And I think that's an amazing thing to have achieved. So I think it's one of those, it's great paying other people's work compliments. I enjoy that because you never feel like you're being big-headed about yourself, but I think it is, I think particularly it does come again down to that blend between the audio and visuals that just, it's a real high watermark. I kind of, it's one of the areas in all of the games we've made that I'm most proud of.
I think as well, you think you know what you're getting with Dear
Yes.
Esther for the first 45 minutes of the game, wherever we are at this point, and then you step into something completely unexpected and completely new, and I think it just throws the player such a curveball in such a wonderful way.
I think when you're designing a game, it's very easy to get locked into what the system can do. And you're trying to deal with different variations. The player does this, then this. You have to deal with the consequence here. Our lead designer, Andrew, all the time about you might have an idea, but then how does this radiate out throughout the entire system? And you get very caught in the idea of what the system has to be and how robust the system has to be and this kind of thing. And I think what's really important as a sort of a designer, as a creative, is that understanding that actually the real game is happening in the player's head and that the system can be whatever you want it to be, but if the game isn't running in the player's head as opposed to on the screen, then you're missing a trick. You're not letting the game be everything it could be. And I think the great thing about working with a game as simple as Esther in a way is that those sort of consequences of player interaction, there's not a huge number of them in the way that there might be with a very mechanically complex game. So you can really heavily focus on what is the game experience that's being played out within the player's sort of mind and heart at the moment. And there are other, sort of, I know this is a kind of a way of approaching game design that has become increasingly popular over the last few years, and like Journey was a really, really good example of that game company really focusing on what's the emotional experience of playing this game. But I think, again, it's probably one of the reasons why Esther has lasted as long as it has done, because it's not a mechanical exercise, it's an exercise in trying to inspire you as a player to have the deepest experience and the deepest engagement and to really run the game in your own head rather than something that you're sitting 6 feet away from kind of interacting with. I hate interaction is a term for that. I think it becomes very cold and mechanical and systems driven. And really interaction is completely trivial and pointless if there isn't an emotional engagement with the player and you haven't moved it away from the screen and into the player's head. What's really important to me is that Dear Esther started out as a Half-Life 2 mod, and if the Half-Life 2 modding community hadn't championed it and celebrated it and downloaded it a lot and talked about it and loved it, then it would never have been a game. So it's never really bothered me, the kind of is it a game conversation, because as far as I can see it, Dear Esther and like everything that's come after it has been inspired by it. This was championed by Half-Life 2 modders, and they made it what it is. And so if you've made something that the real kind of hardcore of the hardcore in terms of these are first-person shooter modders have gone, this is really good and really special and we're behind this, then you've already got the support of a really amazing gaming community, and the fact that they championed it, we owe them a huge amount in terms of where we are. And I'm really proud to come out of that scene. I'm really proud to be a company and to be sitting here talking about a game that started life as a mod.
Yeah, I think they're the ones that have really kind of like pushed us forward and given us the passion to be able to take it to a commercial level and give us the confidence to make us believe that there's an audience for this kind of thing.
Dear Esther was my first foray into writing music for games, and I actually approached it very traditionally, so more as a film score than a traditional interactive game music score. And what's really interesting for me is that the lack of interactivity in the music was never a problem for anybody that played the game. And that's a separate discussion, but there's a big schism between game music composers of how much the music should be following the player at all times in terms of interactive music. But one of the reasons I wanted to say something at this point was that this was my little first journey into thinking about how you write music for games rather than films. So I had this song that was a certain length, and Dan said, well, we don't know how long the player is going to take to traverse through that space. And I thought, oh no, he's right, and slightly panicked. So this was a very simple solution where the song was split in half, and then I wrote some drone music that could just play for as long as was needed as the player walks through the space, and then the second half of the song would seamlessly play. And it's very, very simple, but it's quite emblematic for me in terms of my career, because it was the first time that I